Hey everybody, welcome to another live stream with Purple Insider. And this time my usual partner Sam Ekstrom is on IR with some voice issues. And so sitting in his seat for this week's Purple Insider and Bring Me the News stream is from Bring Me the News, Joe Nelson. What is up, Joe? And welcome to your first time on the stream.
It's a bye-week bonanza, and I'm ready for it. I really am. Thank you.
Yeah, if you listen to the Purple Insider podcast, you know that I have been singing. How does the song even go? Now I'm forgetting. I'm gonna have to go back and listen.
Bye-week bonanza.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, bye week bonanza. So that's right. All week long on the Purple Insider podcast, we'll be looking back at what has happened to the Minnesota Vikings so far and where things are going, and we'll do it in a lot of fun ways. And so, Joe, the way I want to do it for this live stream in particular is by ranking stuff. And I think the place that I want to begin ranking things is where we think the Minnesota Vikings rank in the NFL as a football team, because I think that's the broadest place that we could possibly begin, and then we'll break down and rank other stuff. Where do you think that if you had to power rank the entire league after what you saw in Carolina, how close they made it, how good the offense was, where would you put them?
Probably like 13 to 15, somewhere in there. I mean, if you think about the NFC, it's pretty stacked and top heavy. You have the Rams, you have the Cowboys. They're both 5-1. The Cardinals are 6-0. Obviously, we know the Vikings can hang with the Cardinals based on what we saw. We'll find out if they can hang with the Cowboys on Halloween night. But the Packers are better than the Vikings at this point. You could argue that the Saints are better than the Vikings. You could even argue that the Bears are better than the Vikings if Justin Fields figures it out. So there's a long list of really good teams in the NFC, and it's stacked and deep. I think the Vikes can hang with them, but I can't put them at that same level just yet. And then in the AFC, it's absolutely loaded. We saw last night Tennessee and Buffalo go toe-to-toe. I think everybody thought going into the season those two teams were probably going to be right in the mix at the end of it with Kansas City and company. So, yeah, I mean, the Vikings are about to find out just how good they are when they come out of the bye week with the gauntlet of teams they have to face.
Right. And even though this is the most basic NFL question you could ask is where do all the teams sit at a certain point in the league? I also think that it's a really interesting question because I think that they tend to sit on this sort of fringe between the teams that we know are good and the teams that we're pretty certain are bad. So if you look at, kind of where the standings are after playing Carolina, the Vikings and Chicago, Carolina are 3-3, San Francisco, Atlanta 2-3. I mean, San Francisco, I'm not really sure what they are yet because Trey Lance is just getting his feet wet. Jimmy Garoppolo, as always, is hurt. But we'll assume if they're playing a rookie quarterback, it's going to be a tough road for them. But Chicago, Carolina, so like those are other 3-3 teams. You are, I think, clearly better than Carolina as an overall football team. But also couldn't close them out. And that's another part of it is the imperfections of the Vikings. Every team has them because there are so many teams and lots of parity, but the imperfections have really shown up in these last couple of weeks of letting teams that have no business being in games come back in these games. And at the same time, you could contradict that by saying, but if you look at the offensive and defensive performances against Detroit, the defense gives up basically nothing until the Vikings fumble at their own goal line. And then against Carolina in the second half, they put together one of the best offensive performances in Vikings history in the second half of that game. And yet you look at the final scores and it still feels like, well, wait a minute, these two things don't add up. And I agree with you that I think that it's somewhere in that what puts you in a playoff spot, but does not make you a Super Bowl contender. And I think that that's where you put them right now. Now, let me ask you another question. Where do you think if we were asked to do this in 6 weeks, we would say the Vikings rank?
Well, honestly, as dumb as it sounds, maybe to a lot of people out there, I'm actually fairly optimistic about their chances coming out of the bye against, what is it? They go Cowboys, Ravens, Chargers, Packers, Niners, Lions, or something like that. And it's just a murderer's row. I'm fairly confident about that just because I love their chances at home against the Cowboys. I'm tossing out the Kirk Cousins primetime Sunday Night Football stigma. I'm not going to worry about that until it happens again. Baltimore on the road is tough, but Baltimore's proved, I think, that they basically play up or down to their competition. So I think the Vikings will be right in that game all night long. And the Chargers, I'm not totally convinced about just yet. And then obviously the border battle with the Packers here in Minneapolis is going to be probably pretty tight. So I do think they have a decent shot to come out of that something like 7-4, which seems absolutely bat bleep crazy. But I mean, if they are 7-4, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, well, hey, let's see how deep they can go this year. I really do think that could happen. Will it happen? I don't know. The more likely thing to happen, it would probably be more like 4-7 coming out of that stretch. That's the more likely thing that's going to happen. And if that's the case, then all of a sudden you're still a middle of the road team in the NFL, probably pushing closer to the bottom 15 than you are the top 15 or 16. So I don't know, but I do feel a little bit optimistic just because I don't think a team can crap down their legs so many times in a row and keep on, playing. That sounds stupid, obviously, but they're going to keep playing. However, it just can't happen so many times in a row. You're going to finally close some of these games out.
Yeah, well, so that's the thing, that you try to look at the broader statistics and what they tell you, because any game can go one way or the other. Like you mentioned, that game last night with the Bills and Titans, where, if Josh Allen's left foot sticks in the ground a little bit better, the Bills have a great chance to win that game. And then we're talking about them as the Super Bowl favorites at this moment, but they come just a little bit short. His foot slips, the left tackle gets blown up, and then all of a sudden now it's, oh, well, you're 4-2, Tennessee's 4-2, and you guys suddenly look equal. This is where the broader numbers help us. And with the Vikings, they're even a contradiction there, because there are certain numbers for the Vikings, including even passing yards, which maybe we wouldn't have expected, where they're at the top of the league. Scoring, they're more in the middle. Scoring percentage, like the percentage of drives in which they score, is very underwhelming. It's actually below average in the NFL in the amount of drives in which they score. And yet, Kirk Cousins' quarterback rating, his Pro Football Focus grade, like they're all really good. And then you look at the defensive side and try to project what's going to happen going forward. But that's really hard to do, because against Joe Burrow, he did pretty well against the Vikings in the first half of that game, especially to get Cincinnati ahead. Kyler Murray, another very good quarterback, maybe the MVP of the league right now,
Right.
He put up 400 yards against the Vikings in that game. And then when they play the worst quarterbacks, an injured Baker Mayfield who was missing open receivers, Jared Goff, and then Sam Darnold, the defense ends up looking like the 2000 Ravens at times in those games. And then, doesn't come up with some clutch plays. But I don't think that those last couple of games really project well to figuring out how are they going to do against Dak Prescott, who's putting up 400 yards passing a game, and the Dallas Cowboys offensive line that is just still terrific and has bounced back and has been healthy this year, and they're getting La'el Collins back, and the Baltimore Ravens and a running quarterback like that that's similar to Kyler Murray, but even more dynamic in terms of his running ability. I don't know that we really have a sense for what the defense is. I think that we know what the offense can be, and I think we know the things that hold the offense back at times, but the defense, Joe, that's where I need to see a lot more to know, are they actually what they've done the last 3 weeks, or was that more just schedule and quarterback related?
I think we know what their peak performance is. It's the second half of the Seattle game. I mean, you got to remember from that game, that was week 3, I think it was, and week 2, I can't remember, week 2 or 3 or 4. And Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf were absolutely shredding the Vikings in the first half. And we were thinking, oh God, here we go again. It's going to be this kind of season. It's going to be Mike Zimmer's looking at, if he still has a job next year, another cornerback in the first round, because this is a nightmare. Guys are getting shredded up and down the field, and you can't stop anybody. But in the second half, something clicked, something happened, and they shut down Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett was a non-factor. The running game had no impact on the Vikings defense, and the offense was explosive. You can argue that was Kirk's best game as a pro. I mean, 30 for 38 with 300-something yards and 3 touchdowns. You can argue that. If you play like that rest of the year, you are a competitor. You're a contender. But they haven't proved capable of doing that more than a quarter or two at a time. And that's kind of their MO at this point. You're a roller coaster ride all season long. And until they can straighten some things out and play consistently, you never know what you're going to get. That's why, again, I won't be shocked if Dak doesn't go for 404 touchdowns on Sunday Night Football on Halloween. I won't be shocked if he does, because you just don't know what you're going to get. And we don't know yet how big of an influence Patrick Peterson, with him out with the hamstring injury now, was for that secondary. Because it felt like he was kind of manned up against guys all game long and holding his own for the most part as an aging former All-Pro. Now, without him, you've got Cameron Dantzler stepping in, or Harrison Hand, or whoever it might be, and Bashaud Breeland is now the top dog out there. And that's a frightening scenario potentially unfolding week after week after week, because this does not sound like a quick fix for Patrick Peterson. He was on a podcast, I think it was yesterday, and he was saying, oh, man, I've never had one like this before. And it doesn't sound like a guy who's going to be back in a month, much less maybe before the end of the season.
Right. In the best case scenario, he comes back off of IR, I believe, after the Ravens game, because I think this week counts and then the next 2 weeks. But
I didn't know if the bye week counted or not.
I think it does. Yeah, I think it does. And then so you're talking about a guy who is in his 30s, though. And while he hasn't had significant injuries, a hamstring is something that can hang around. And that is a big concern, because their coverage over these last few weeks has been much, much better than it was. As you mentioned, that sort of started to click in the second half of the Seattle game. The other thing that started to click was the offense kept the defense off the field. And that's something that I think maybe is sort of underrated when you sort of talk about offenses and defenses. We like push them to each side. Okay, you're on this side of the room, you're on that side. But I think that they're connected if you can control the ball and if you can force other teams to play from behind. It often, I think, will really help your defense, because you can pass rush much more, be much more aggressive and things like that. And they have not really had any games where they've been able to pull away and just put their opponent away, except for the Seattle game. So we've seen how the offense can make a difference there if they can stay on the field. But when they're going up against great quarterbacks, I'm not super confident that all of a sudden Bashaud Breeland's going to find it, or Cam Dantzler is going to become a Pro Bowl level corner once he gets this opportunity. I think there's a reason why he doesn't have this opportunity, because he really didn't play well in the preseason training camp. And then he goes in the game last week and gets beat in the biggest situation as the Panthers are trying to come back. So I don't think there's a ton of confidence there. And with teams that have things you really believe in and things you really don't believe in, 500 teams. And I think if the Vikings come out of this stretch of 6 games, their next 6, and they end up at 6-6, then they've got a chance to be in the playoffs, and they'll probably be ranked like 16th by the power ranking people, 14th, 16th. If they can do better than that, then they can get into the top 10. And that's what's so wild about this season, Joe, is that at one point it looks like, gosh, are they going to have to trade everybody at the deadline, right? And they're a couple of drives away from being at that point, from Rick Spielman getting questions about, potentially having to trade everybody away and jobs being lost and things like that. And now they're in a spot, if you go any better than 500 in the next 6 games, if you go 4-2, all of a sudden it looks like, wow, this team could really be a contender.
Well, and, I think a lot of Vikings fans believe they are a contender, because I mean, it's really easy to look at this team and say they should be 5-1, or hell, 6-0. I mean, you really can look at them and say that. Week 1, you should have beaten the Bengals. Week 2, you should have beaten Arizona. Week 3, you beat Seattle. Week 4, I mean, I go back to this Cleveland game, and I think I might be alone on an island in this, but I really do believe the officials screwed the Vikings big time in that game. I mean, you can't go back and say what's going to happen. First and goal from the 1-yard line with no time left. But if that pass interference is called on Adam Thielen in the end zone, you have that opportunity to score and tie the game. It's 1 yard with the best running back in the NFL, some might say, or 2 of the best red zone threats in the NFL, and Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. You could definitely say that. And the Vikings defense actually did play pretty well that game. I mean, and Cleveland didn't have a touchdown if it weren't for a phantom defensive holding call on Eric Kendricks in the end zone. So, yeah, the what-if scenarios have this team 5-1 or 6-0 in a lot of Vikings fans' minds right now. Kirk's playing great. That's why I do feel kind of optimistic that they can get through this gauntlet and play pretty well and have 6 or 7 wins. And I'm probably nuts. I probably am, but I won't be shocked.
I have seen your pregame predictions, and so I'm not surprised that you're a hope for the best type of person, with a realistic shade only outside of those predictions
I'm
that are
used
usually like
to
54-3 or something like that.
48.
All right, here's what I want is we'll stay on the schedule and then we'll get to kind of the roster and how people have performed so far this year and do some more rankings. But let's do this. Let's rank of the next 5 games. We've mentioned them many times how hard they are. Dallas, Baltimore, Los Angeles Chargers, Green Bay. And I'll throw San Francisco in there too because Garoppolo might be back or Trey Lance might be cooking at that point, because he's got the talent. He's got Kyle Shanahan. So of those 6 games, I want you to give me either your 3 hardest or just rank them all in order, but 6 might be too many for your brain to handle.
Oh, you're right. My 3 hardest in order, they go at Baltimore, at Los Angeles, at home against Green Bay. I just think anytime you have to play Aaron Rodgers and they're rolling, it's extremely difficult. And that's even at home. That's Mike Zimmer's had success against A-Rod and company, but I don't know. That's just scary. And if you don't have Patrick Peterson, Devontae Adams is going to eat. He's going to eat a lot. And I just hate that scenario. So, yeah, Ron says, what is Joe drinking? Giant tub of water, baby. Giant tub of water.
I believe they call that the purple Kool-Aid. Now you did say that it's not super realistic. You just think it's possible. So just to clarify.
Yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't bet on it by any means. But I do think it's possible that they come out of that pretty good. You know, if they are a shell of what they've been so far, or not a shell, if they are what they've shown to be so far without crapping down their leg, yeah, they could definitely win 3 out of 4 games there. You never know. You got to think, I mean, they're going to come back healthier than they've been with the exception of Patrick Peterson all season. So, and they haven't had many injuries. So I love that. I mean, they really do have a lot of stuff going in their favor. And yeah, purple, rosy colored glasses on. I got it. But back to your question, I go at Baltimore's the toughest. On the road against Lamar is going to be hard. I think going west to Los Angeles is going to be difficult as well. Justin Herbert's a monster. Nobody really, I mean, people talk about him, but it's like, holy cow, this guy's a top 10 quarterback, and they've got a lot of weapons. And Austin Eckler gets no love, and he's so good. And Joey Bosa and that entire defense, they can shut people down. Look what they did against Kansas City earlier this year. So, I mean, I know it hasn't been Patrick Mahomes' shining moment this year so far, but they looked really good in that game too. And then obviously the Green Bay game, like I mentioned. Dallas is going to be tough, but I just really like the Vikings out of a bye at home. Raucous atmosphere. We don't know how healthy Dak is. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we have to wait and monitor to really see how scary the Cowboys are in 13, 14 days, whatever it is.
Well, this is the interesting thing about where they stand is that you can talk yourself into either way. Like you can talk yourself into, well, they can play with all these teams, or there's no way they can play with all these teams. I mean, in one way, it's look at what the offense is capable of at its best. And so if it's at its best for out of these next 5 games, 3 of them or 4 of them, then you can compete with any of these teams. But at the same time, you have decisions that hold back the offense. And I wrote about that at the website, just about putting the gas pedal down and how the Vikings tend to run at disadvantageous times. It's not really even just about their yards per attempt, but how they just don't make great choices of when to run, when to kick field goals, when to punt, when to go for 2. These things are not consistent. And so to pick my 3 toughest games, I think I'm right there with you, because even though Dallas and Dak Prescott, who also has the week off this week, so should be at least healthier or healthy-ish in that game, I would have the concern about the secondary of the Vikings versus their receivers. I think that's a big worry. And also Dallas's defensive line is playing well. So I would put them probably 3rd. But I'm going to go with Baltimore and Los Angeles at the top. Baltimore, I know, has played a lot of close games and some of them even close against Detroit. But they are a really well-coached team, and I think they make the smarter decisions, and they have a quarterback who can do it all himself. So if you outplay Lamar, he can still beat you if you beat them in every other area. And plus, if every game's coming down to a game-winning kick, I'll take Justin Tucker. And so I think that one is really hard. Going to Los Angeles is just hard in general, as long as the whole building is in purple, I think. But I agree with your point about their Their defense, I think, is a big deal in their defensive line. And then I'll pick Dallas here because of their receivers. And I won't go Green Bay because I think that actually Mike Zimmer has matched up well against Aaron Rodgers. And I watched them, and last year at times I was wowed by Green Bay. Like, man, their offense is just shredding people. This year, they're getting through games that they should win, some with some luck mixed in against Cincinnati, for example. I guess both kickers were melting down either way, but they're not running people out of the building. And I think that's one that the Vikings should be able to win. So let me get back to our ranking stuff. I want you to rank for me, Joe, the 3 players who have exceeded expectations for you and the 3 players who have not. We'll just start with the ones that have, and then we'll talk about the ones that have not. So the three Vikings players who have exceeded.
First guy that pops up for me, and this you'll know more about it. This is just me on the eye test, okay? DJ Wanham. I feel like he's created a lot of havoc in the last few weeks. I know he was kind of absent the first handful of games, or not even handful of games, first few games, but I feel like he's put a lot of pressure on the quarterbacks. This is literally just off top of the head. What have I seen lately? And I feel like Wanham has done a little bit of damage lately. And now you're probably going to throw some snap count at me like, oh, he's only played 13 snaps in the last 2 weeks or something like that.
Well, right. Here's what I'd say. Here's what I'd say about Wanham is that he's in a better role now. That the role of a starter for him is probably not the fit where he should be. Everson Griffin being the starter is, I think, much better for Wanham to just fit in those certain situations where he can succeed. I would say that. So he has looked better in those spots than as a starter.
Yeah. KJ Osborne is obviously somebody who's outperformed everybody and their expectations, except for Sam Ekstrom, who's been on this bandwagon since like June 1st. I don't know when he got on that bandwagon, but last year he looked like a lost cause. And now all of a sudden he looks really good. And a lot of people are saying the best third wide receiver the Vikings have had since, Jake Reed. I mean, I don't know if I go that far, but he has looked really good. And the most impressive part about him isn't just the stats and the numbers in a game-winning touchdown. It's the catches he's made in big situations, whether it be third downs or fourth downs. Kirk Cousins doesn't have these game-tying or game-winning drive opportunities, if not for a bunch of really sure-handed plays by KJ Osborne this season. So he deserves a ton of credit. And lastly, Greg Joseph. You know, he's been up or down. He had that 49-yarder he left short. He had the 37-yarder he missed. He also had the 49-yarder this last week that he missed that could have given the Vikings a nice cushion there, or even a win. But overall, the guy is drilling a lot of field goals and scoring points for a team that has struggled to finish drives. So I've been pretty pleased with Greg Joseph.
That's the Vikings.
I want to hear yours.
The Vikings actually lead the NFL in field goal attempts. And so Greg Joseph has made 76%. I think if you did the math on expectation of 50 plus, he has by far exceeded that expectation that he's made so many 50 plus kicks, because even Rick Spielman mentioned it when we talked to him today about how he missed all of them in the preseason from 50 plus and then has come out and made those. I think that Joseph being somewhat up and down is where I expected him to be. That if you put all of your games on the leg of a kicker who is not named Justin Tucker or Matt Prater, you're kind of going to get what you get. Some of them are going to go in, some of them aren't. And, the ones that miss, people will say, oh, bad luck, missed kick. And the ones that he makes from 50 plus, it's like, well, that's how we drew it up.
Yeah, and you got to remember, he's the mental strain of being a kicker in Minnesota is significant, and that's true. Whether he wants to admit it or not, he says he just goes out there and does his job like a robot, right? And he's done that, which is really impressive. I don't know many guys that have come here. Dan Bailey was the most accurate kicker in NFL history. Comes here and all hell breaks loose, and he's like, "Oh my God, get the shackles off me, I'm gone." This is tough. This is a tough place to kick. There's a lot of pressure. People are. I don't know if there's a city or state in the entire country that talks about kickers as much as we do here in Minnesota. Maybe your home city of Buffalo back in the 90s, but my God, there is a ton of pressure on kickers. So the fact that he could miss a 37-yard chip shot in week 2 and not have his whole season go running down his leg is a miracle. So I give credit for that.
No, that's a good point. That, bouncing back from it is not the expectation here. The expectation is you miss one and this whole thing is going to go off the rails.
Let's see where you're going to be buried.
The guy who followed Scott Norwood, by the way, Steve Christie, is one of the best kickers in NFL history. Yeah. So they didn't have that problem outside of one guy and one kick, and Norwood was actually good for his day. But hey, just like the Vikings did in '98, the Bills in that Super Bowl, they kind of pulled up and played for the field goal. And instead of being a little more aggressive, just saying that
Mike would learn. Mike Zimmer would learn from all of this history. So many lessons to be had. Yet when there's 40 seconds left in a timeout and you're at your 25 in the first half, you just want to sit on it every single week. And then the same situation unfolds at the end of the game, and you're like, oh, my God, I have no other option. Kirk, do what you do. And Kirk has done a good job with KJ Osborne and everybody else, and they go down and score points. It's like I get so mad watching the Vikings because every other good team in the NFL does not just let time leak off the clock. They take advantage of it, and they go for the kill. There's not much of a killer instinct on this team. The coaching staff, the players. I'm sure the players would love it if they had the ability to have more of a killer instinct, but they're being held back. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah, you know what I think that you see is if you remember the game between Baltimore and Indianapolis, where Indianapolis did the same thing. They sort of checked up and said, okay, let's kick that field goal. And then Rodrigo Blankenship missed it. I think it shows trust in the quarterback and where it is. And Mike Zimmer has just over the last few years not shown a ton of trust in Kirk Cousins. And maybe these last few weeks will make that different. I don't know that it will, or if it's just this is how Mike Zimmer is going to manage a football game at all times. But Cousins, over these last few games and these opportunities that he's gotten to lead game-winning drives, I think has shown Zimmer, like, we can do this. We can take the ball and go in 40 seconds and get it in a good field goal position, or even potentially score a touchdown, depending on how many timeouts they have, because of the receivers that they have. And so on my list of the players who have overachieved expectations, KJ Osborne is, of course, number one. Although, as you mentioned, I mean, this is why Sam and I go stand out there on the hill and watch OTAs and mini camp and training camp, and we get sunburns and everything standing on the sidelines there, is so we get a feel for who's rising and falling during the offseason, because usually it correlates. And in this case, KJ Osborne was there right from the very beginning of the offseason. Something was different, and he's shown this huge elevation from year one to year two. So he is still at the top, because I didn't expect him, even after a good offseason, to come in and just explode like he has in these big situations. Everson Griffin is number two. Now, I never doubted Everson Griffin as if he couldn't play anymore, because I thought, considering that he played for the Cowboys and Lions last year, he actually was okay for them. So I expected okay. I didn't expect great, and I think he's been great so far this season. One of the highest pass rush win rates in the NFL by Pro Football Focus, and he's taken that starting job back, and he has looked like the old Everson Griffin. That is far above expectations.
He might look better than the old Everson Griffin.
At times. I mean, part of it is probably because he was playing in just those pass rush situations. But, you know, now that he's starting, I think he's still playing extremely well. And that's a huge boon for them, because that position, they should have had no confidence in that going into the season, even with Everson coming back on short notice. So there's two. And I think Kirk Cousins has to be the third one. That last year they started off 1-5, and he's had slow starts to his career year after year. He has never put up a Pro Football Focus grade as high as it is right now. He's almost at a 90 grade. He's never been close to that. I think his career high was 84 before. And leading the game-winning drives as he has, and coming through in the clutch situations, I think you expect, given 4 opportunities to do so. I think that's right? Like four or 5 chances. Maybe there were 2 in one game.
Game time, he's had 7 in 6 games.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's right. That there have been multiple ones of these.
They just haven't finished them.
Right. Yeah. So out of all those opportunities for him to come through almost every time, that I would not have written down, and I think a lot of people would not have written down. If that one is too obvious for you, then I guess Xavier Woods would be a guy I'd go for, because I didn't know what to expect out of Xavier Woods, and I think he's been a terrific partner so far for Harrison Smith. Now, on the
great take, because we don't notice him as fans, really, right? If you don't notice a guy in the secondary, it means he's doing his job.
Right. And that's always been that role is like make a couple of plays. He got a pick against Arizona. He forced a fumble against Carolina, make a couple plays, be in the right spots, and you're going to do okay next to Harrison Smith. Now give me your three guys that have disappointed you so far this season.
Three guys that have disappointed me so far this season. Well, Garrett Bradbury disappoints me almost every single week. He's like the new Ryan Cook in my book. And old school Vikings fans from the early 2000s know exactly what I'm talking about. But Bradbury, granted, I will admit the offensive line since the first 2 weeks and then the Cleveland game has looked pretty good for 4 games, or 3 games, half the season. But the one common denominator I keep seeing is Garrett Bradbury getting his lunch shoved in his face, and he's back in Kirk Cousins' lap. And that's really bad news for this offense. Kirk's been really good, and Bradbury has been better. I don't have the grades on it or anything like that, but I mean, for a first-round pick with the wrestler cred and all this good stuff, athletic, agile, he might just not be big enough. That just might be the reality of the situation. So that one right off the bat, you have to give me a second here to think of somebody who is disappointing me.
Well, I can jump in with
go ahead. React.
I'll go Bradbury too on my list. So I'll agree with you there. Sheldon Richardson is another one that if we were making a consensus list, I think that we'd both agree on that when they signed Sheldon Richardson and we gave it an A+ signing, on our show, we thought Sheldon Richardson's going to come in, solidify this pass rush and rotate in and make a big difference. Just no show so far. It has not made really any difference at all. The pressure numbers back that up. So it's not just looking at pure sacks. And even the usage, like last week, they decided to use Armon Watts a really good amount. And Armon Watts actually did quite well against Carolina. But you would have expected as soon as Michael Pierce got hurt, okay, they're going to go right to Tomlinson and Sheldon Richardson. And the fact that that hasn't been the case, I think really sort of tells you where they feel Sheldon Richardson is. And he's been a disappointment. In fact, if you're going to look to trade anyone away from the team, I don't know that they will at the trade deadline, but Sheldon Richardson might be a guy that I would say, yeah, if somebody else wants him because he's just not really contributing here.
I think that's perfectly said. And I think the third one, I'm going to go with a 3-way tie on the third one, but it goes to the obvious position of cornerback. Right? Everybody's going to say Bashaud Breeland, and I'm sorry for putting your Johnson in my mouth here, but that's just the case, okay? You haven't been very good up until last week, and that's his tweet. I didn't actually mean that. And then Cameron Dantzler, just because, I mean, come on, this is a guy who was a high draft pick last year, and he looked pretty good at times, and now all of a sudden, you're not even playing for the most part. And you're complaining about it. And you probably had to have a sit down with Grandpa Mike, and he had to talk to you and get you back in the mix. And now you're going to have your opportunity to redeem yourself. But then here's a guy that nobody talks about anymore because he's not even on the team right now, Jeff Gladney. There's your first round pick who absolutely screwed up big time, allegedly. And now he's under criminal investigation in Texas and facing criminal charges. So he's not even on the team. When you lose a first-round cornerback who are supposed to be better after year one, and you're that big Antoine Winfield-type player who can come up and play the run and everything, you're putting your team in a big hole. And now Patrick Peterson's hurt, and we're starting to see all of the issues that could arise just from that whole thing in the offseason. So I'm going 3-way tie with those 3 cornerbacks.
It also might be depending on how much you want to factor injuries too for like Anthony Barr that – Anthony Barr was coming back from that injury. He's supposed to make a big difference on the defense, and he has been fine over the last 2 weeks, and he's a better football player than Nick Vigil. I think that's very clear. But to have a knee issue that nagged him through the entire offseason and then have to come back, and he talked about how not that he was out of shape necessarily, but being in shape to play an entire football game is really tough. And he felt like his body was going to explode because he hadn't played for so long. I mean, for his contract to be what it is and his value to the defense and how much he was supposed to make a difference, that has not been the case through 6 games. Now that can change, but I think I would put him on the list just because of that. And, the thing about when we talk about good breaks and bad breaks, I think it's actually a good break for the Vikings that it takes some time to think about who's been disappointing, because often you look at it and say like, oh, well, okay, this guy got hurt and we had high expectations for him and this guy disappeared and didn't show up. But a lot of their signings have actually worked out. And as you mentioned, they've been quite healthy throughout the beginning of this season. And I think that if they stay that way, then they do have a chance to do the things that you were talking about optimistically earlier. But if they don't, then it could be problematic. I wonder what you feel about just the other offensive linemen. I don't want to put disappointing on like Oli Udoh playing guard for the first time. Yeah. Ezra Cleveland has not been a difference maker at left guard. He's been better than Dakota Dozier was last year. I don't know if that's disappointing or somewhat expected. But I think the offensive line as a whole, though, we could take as a whole and actually put them in our other list of exceeded expectations outside of one game against Cleveland.
Yeah, I mean, I was scared out of my mind for Kirk Cousins the first couple of weeks and then the Cleveland game. But yeah, I mean, I really do agree that they have protected him pretty well. And the run blocking's been good. I mean, it's been pretty good, right? So Brian O'Neill, I mean, you had that great column about him the other day where he's just doesn't give up anything. He doesn't allow Kirk to get hit. Darrisaw on the other side, we had promising 52 snaps from him, I think it was, and his first start, he looked pretty good. We don't know yet. The jury's out on him. If Rashad Hill's in there all season long, I'm scared. I really am, and I don't trust this team to. I don't trust Kirk to continue doing what he's doing if Rashad Hill's your starting left tackle all season long. But then, yeah, I mean, Oli Udoh, I mean, that's a late round draft pick who's ended up looking pretty good, and he's earned a starting job. What bothers me the most, though, when you talk about the starting offensive line is that outside of Brian O'Neill, Rick Spielman and the scouts on this team, whoever are evaluating and making these picks, it's not working. Bradbury's not that good. Ezra Cleveland doesn't look like he's going to be a game changer on the offensive line, right? Doesn't look like he's just going to maul people week in and week out. And then you have the Pat Elflein experiment, another Ohio State player back a few years ago. And Rick was just obsessed with him because he worked with concrete during the summers, right? Like you got the wrestler in Bradbury, you got the concrete guy in Pat Elflein. These are big, tough guys, right? They're going to be able to get their noses dirty and bully it up in the trenches. No, they can't. It hasn't worked out that way at all. So I think that's a massive indictment on the drafting process. It's for some reason Spielman has always struggled with quarterbacks and offensive linemen, and it's a pattern that has to absolutely stop.
And, against Detroit, too, if we're sort of nitpicking through, they really got dominated on the run game and were not able to get the run going, despite the fact that Detroit was playing so much more not to give up big passing plays. And so they've shown flaws. It hasn't been a dominant offensive line or a top 10 offensive line. It's been an offensive line that you still are going to go into each week against some of these better defensive lines going, are you going to be able to hold up? And another part of it has been they've used more quick game this year. A lot more quick game than they have before. Yeah.
They absolutely have to. And I think they had to start doing that after the first 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. It was obvious that Kirk was going to get killed back there. He didn't have 3-4 seconds. He had to go 1-2 bang out. And that's why, on the play actions, he's throwing the ball farther down the field on average. But if it's not a play action pass, he's getting rid of the ball quickly. And that's why his yards per attempt are, rather low in terms of, ranking among the other top quarterbacks in the NFL. But he's done well with what he's had.
Right. And I think that has also helped lower those pressure numbers. So if their goal is to lower the pressure numbers, that's got to be baked in, because in terms of the grades, they have not been graded individually particularly well outside of O'Neill. Christian Darrisaw can change this, though, I think, in terms of how long they can wait to throw the football, the pass protection overall, and what he showed in pass protection against Carolina. That speaks to the fact that he's just far more physically gifted than Rashad Hill and has the potential to change that. But we'll see how he performs against very good edge rushers that are coming up the rest of the way. Okay, last one for you.
I want for you. I have a sneaky one.
Okay.
For you.
All right. All right. Go ahead.
Oh, you want me to go first? Okay. I just want to know where you would rank Kirk Cousins by how he's playing so far this year. Where would you
among all NFL quarterbacks?
Among all NFL quarterbacks. I mean, I have a reference list here that I really agree with. And I can read that off to you and tell me if you think it's right, because I think a lot of people would think about this and be like, oh my God, Kirk Cousins, he's an MVP candidate so far the way he's played, right?
No, I don't think so. I think he's come through for them in some really big moments but there have also been long stretches where they have not been able to produce much. And, you can certainly put that on Clint Kubiak. You could put it on Zimmer, but ultimately at the end of the day, he's the guy who has routinely had long stretches of quietness before hot stretches. And that's for games in seasons and within games, like against Carolina, where, at one point he throws the ball backwards out of bounds for 7-yard loss and then comes out and, makes some great throws the rest of the way. But this is kind of who Kirk Cousins has been. I would put him maybe like 8th or so. And I think that, you watch every Vikings game, everyone who watches this watches every Vikings game, and not necessarily every game of other quarterbacks, but the quarterback play in the league at the very top this year has been preposterous, right? Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, Justin Herbert until last week. Lamar Jackson had one of the greatest football games ever played in NFL history against the Indianapolis Colts. I think that there's probably maybe 8 to 10 quarterbacks who have been better overall. But that doesn't mean he hasn't been really good. If you're in the top third, then you've been good. But I think that if we expand our view a little bit and look at some of the freakish performance, even Josh Allen, the way he's played and last night just throwing it up for grabs over and over again and using his legs too, which you have to factor now. You can't just look at quarterback rating. You've got to look at also the running part that Kirk Cousins doesn't have. And
what are you talking about? These guys 16 yards on that fourth quarter overtime drive. No,
you're right. That was a big mistake by Brian Burns trying to cause a strip sack instead of just sacking him.
I thought Kirk was dead right there.
I thought so too. But where would you have him? Because I would go like probably maybe 8th.
Yeah, no, I think you absolutely just crushed that answer, because I love this guy. He's a close personal friend of mine, but Peter King, formerly of Sports Illustrated and Football Morning in America. Here's his list this week based on how they're playing right now, not just overall. Right now, 1, Kyler Murray, 2, Josh Allen, 3, Dak, Lamar Jackson 4, Brady 5, Rodgers 6, Herbert 7, Mahomes 8, Matthew Stafford, who's absolutely crushing it with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods in LA at 9. He's got Kirk 10, followed by Derek Carr and Joe Burrow. I saw that, and again, maybe it's just the purple Kool-Aid running through my blood, but I'm watching Kirk this year, and I'm really loving this late game killer mentality he's had. And he's had some help with KJ Osborne and some others in these situations, some penalties, all that, but that's what everybody gets, right? But Kirk, to me, has played MVP caliber. If the Vikings were 5-1 right now and they'd won some of these games, he's definitely in the MVP conversation. You can't argue that. Now, that MVP conversation doesn't get any smaller. All of the guys I just mentioned on Peter King's list, they're still in that conversation as well, and maybe even ahead of him. But holy cow, I was thinking like, oh, he's playing like a top 5-6 quarterback. And then I read Peter King's list, and I'm thinking, my God, QB play in this league is freaking sick right now.
Right.
And that makes me very worried about the future, because Kellen Mond is the backup, and that's a nightmare. Everybody knows that's not going to work. Everybody knows Kellen Mond's not going to work. Kellen Mond knows that Kellen Mond's not going to work.
Sean Mannion is the backup.
That even more proof.
Which tells you Kellen Mond isn't going to work. But to your point, like Aaron Rodgers didn't even make that list, right? And
he was on the list. He was 6, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. But you go through Brady still playing like Brady. Rodgers, outside of 1 week, has played very well. Joe Burrow belongs there. Maybe Derek Carr, after this distraction, is going to be there as well. So a lot of quarterbacks have played exceptionally well. And that's my point about how, you watch Kirk and then maybe catch one game of these other quarterbacks, a sampling over a season of just a couple games. And I'm not sure you totally realize how great someone like Kyler Murray or Dak Prescott has been this year. And I think they've probably been a little bit better. And then they add different elements to their game that he maybe necessarily doesn't. But I think in that conversation, for sure. But you also, as an offense, you have to rank higher than 12th in points to have an MVP quarterback. I mean, that's usually reserved for best scoring teams in the league. And ultimately that rests on his shoulders. And the same thing with the percentage of drives where you score. If you graded quarterbacks that way, as like how often their offense scores, you'd probably get a really accurate list. And the Vikings are not super high on that. So finishing drives, Some of it again is coaching, but there's also these long stretches with Cousins. So I think that that's nitpicking, but probably wouldn't put him any higher than maybe 8th. Okay, here's the last one. I just want you to tell me the second half of the season. This does not have to be Vikings related. I'm going to call it second half of the season because it's our bye. What are you most excited about? Just give me 3 things in the NFL that you just can't wait to see.
3 things in the NFL. I really want to see how good the Buffalo Bills actually are. I mean, one of the most fun tandems in the league is Josh Allen to Stephon Diggs. And we all love Stephon Diggs here in Minnesota. I mean, we just do. It's the Minneapolis Miracle. And he's still got that same swagger, and they're fun to watch. They really are a fun team to watch. Obviously, how the Vikings come out of this gauntlet is something I'm excited about. I really am excited because if they do go 3-1 in that gauntlet, or 2-2 even, and you're 5-5, or you're 6-3, or 7-4 for that might even happen. No, you can't go 7-4 in 4 games. You'd be 6-4. But
math is hard live.
Yeah. I know it is hard. It's hard anyway. I was in 4th grade math help and I never recovered. I am excited about that. And then lastly, I would say how real deal the Cardinals are. I mean, they're 6-0, right? They're the only undefeated team in the NFL. Vikings almost beat them. We got a good look at that. But, I mean, they went to Tennessee and absolutely slaughtered a team that I thought was going to be really good this year. And I still think Tennessee is going to be really good down the stretch, especially when it gets late in the season and they're running King Henry at you like they did last night against the Buffalo Bills. They're going to be really tough. But barring all those injuries they suffered, I would say Kyler Murray and just how good and big of a season he has. And one bonus 4th, if the Cowboys are legit, that makes the NFL so much more fun. Because come playoff time, I know a lot of people hate America's team, but that makes the NFL so much more fun. Just like the Yankees in the World Series or in the ALCS makes baseball so much more fun, in my opinion.
I was going to say, people are going to totally despise you for that take.
But I've been hated for my whole life. It's okay.
It's been so long since Dallas has been really legitimate. Like, there were times here and there with Tony Romo where they were highly competitive. But in terms of being a legitimate Super Bowl contender, maybe 1 or 2 years over the last, 30? So 25? I mean, it's been a while. It's been a while. I'm going to say, for me, the number one storyline in the NFL for me that I am excited about and interested in is the rookie quarterbacks and where they go from here. Trey Lance, and if we get to see him play against the Vikings, Justin Fields, where he's at when he plays the Vikings is really interesting to me. Is he emerging as a great quarterback, or is he sputtering and struggling by the time? Because so far it's been a mixed bag for him, and we don't know which way that's going to go. Zach Wilson, does he show anything this year, or does he go into year 2 and just it feels like a total disaster? Can Trevor Lawrence get that Jaguars team going despite its clueless coach?
Oh my God. That's one thing I'm excited about is Urban Meyer being fired. That's happening.
Yes. The coaching disaster and who's next for that are at the top too. I'll also go Kansas City. I'm just super compelled by a flawed team that still has the king quarterback. And I don't care if Mahomes has some tipped interceptions or makes some bad throws. He made a really horrible one this week. He's still king. He's still the best quarterback in the world. And if he can drag this team that has struggled so much defensively and with turnovers all the way to the AFC Championship or something, it'll really truly tell you of his greatness. I think that's at the top for me. And with the Vikings, I mean, I think that they won't be talked about as one of the most interesting teams in the NFL by almost anybody. But I think that they are in this next stretch because there's so much on the line. There's a Cousins extension. There's a future for a GM and a coach. And it really rests on these next 5 games, I think. And there are very few teams like that whose futures rest on just like how you play against Dallas, Baltimore, LA, Green Bay. Those 4 games.
There are a lot of situations where that does unfold. It's just usually not against that quality of opponent back to back.
Right. And
it's like Mike Zimmer's got to go to bed at night feeling like he's laying on a grenade. I mean,
right?
It's bad. That's rough. I mean, because if you don't come out of that stretch well, I mean, that leash could get pulled at any time. It really could.
Exactly. So, Joe Nelson, bring me the news. You host us here on Purple Insider each week, and I can't thank you enough for doing that. And if you're listening to the podcast version, we do this every Tuesday. We just jump on live with the Bring Me the News feeds on Facebook and on YouTube. So find us there. Bring Me the News has great sports coverage, which includes my weekly column as well. Whenever I decide to turn it into.
Oh no, that's perfect. We're gonna enhance the Wolves coverage too this year.
That's right. Our buddy Dane Moore.
Yes,
is joining.
on, so
that's awesome.
So, and he's as good as they get, and he's doing it on his own, just like you do, which is about as admirable as it gets. But anyway, this one's going nuts on me, and this little child I have here, and I just wanted you to know that this has been the greatest honor of my life. Thank you.
Okay, I hope not. But okay, Joe, take care to you and your child, and thank you to everybody who took the time to watch and listen. And we'll catch you next time.
All right, man.